If you could go back 10 years and ask someone what their favourite stealth game was, they'd give you one of three answers: Metal Gear Solid, Hitman, or Splinter Cell. Splinter Cell was Ubisoft's answer to the growing demand of stealth games, and was met with high critical success on its first few entries. But if you were to ask someone when the next installment of the franchise was to be released, you'd have no answer. So why has Splinter Cell fallen into the void of beloved franchises which we may not see the light of day again? Today we're going to look at the previous entries of the Splinter Cell series to remind ourselves why they were great games, but to also missteps might have caused this franchise to go ghost. The first entry in the series, titled Splinter Cell, and also the follow-up game Pandora Tomorrow, unfortunately refused to run on my PC, so regretfully I won't be covering them in this episode. We will be starting our analysis with the third game in the series, which by most people's accounts is also the best title in the franchise. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory came out in 2005 and is the highest rated entry into the franchise, with good reason too. Chaos Theory captivates a true representation of what it might feel like to be a US stealth operative working in the shadows. The previous games in the franchise, despite being stealth games, still had a very linear feel, resulting in the player feeling more like they were on the rails instead of making their own choices. Chaos Theory sees this as an opportunity to grow, and gives you a true sandbox environment with a high level of player agency to be able to tackle your objectives. At the start of each mission, you're given your main objective within a sandbox map, and that's pretty much as far as it goes for hand-holding. After that, it's your choice how to tackle your mission, whether that be infiltrating through the roof, performing non-lethal takedowns, hacking keypads to get through heavily guarded areas, or even just going guns blazing to get to your objective, which is usually not the most ideal way, as you can be put down in just one or two shots. At the time of release, player agency was quite rare, as most games opted for a very linear and story-driven approach. This set Chaos Theory miles ahead of its competition, and still holds up well even today. Another key component of this game was the importance of lighting and shadows. Whereas for most games it's just for the aesthetic, Splinter Cell makes it a key component of its gameplay. As a stealth agent, remaining in the shadows prevents you from being undetected, and the ability to be able to disable lights in the area to create darker areas for you to hide in brought a level of complexity to mission structure not even seen in today's standards. The only area in which Chaos Theory fell short was its story. The plot is extremely vague and is purely there just to give the gameplay narrative and direction. Due to Chaos Theory having such solid gameplay mechanics, critics at the time said very little about the plot and instead focused on praising the game itself. But it seems in the Ubisoft headquarters, they were aware that the story was lackluster and decided to make more of an effort with the next game in the series. Double Agent doubles down on its main character Sam Fisher, as well as giving us a story which relies heavily on player agency and morale choices. After finding out that his daughter Sarah had died in a car crash, Sam Fisher goes off the grid and into a downward spiral of depression. With his handler Lambert still needing to utilise him in missions, he sends him undercover into a prison to infiltrate a terrorist group known as the John Brown Army. After successfully infiltrating the terrorist group, you have to complete objectives set out both by Lambert but also the terrorist group to remain trustworthy. This is indicated by a bar at the bottom of the screen, which represents the trust you have with both agencies. The more people you kill, the less Lambert trusts you. The more missions you discreetly sabotage, the less the John Brown Army trusts you. This is one of the more interesting uses of player agency to have been featured in a video game, and still to this day has not been replicated by other games. Having to constantly balance yourself across a thin line brought a level of tension and weight behind every choice you made during your missions. Double Agent innovated on the previous entries in terms of its focus on storyline and character development, but unfortunately the actual gameplay took a back seat. Besides the trust meter during missions giving your decisions more weight, the overall gameplay is pretty much Chaos Theory version 2, with next to no changes in the gameplay mechanics. Instead, Double Agent chooses to add more action sequences, or as I like to call them, Hollywood moments, in an attempt to amp up the scenario in which you're in. But unfortunately they come off as forced and mundane. The settings throughout the game felt more diverse than they had in Chaos Theory, but at the same time they became much more linear, with only a few ways to reach your objective. Going back and playing this game, I can still have a lot of fun and enjoy the overall story and gameplay, but from a critical standpoint, it's not hard to see why this entry was looked at with such fatigue. Double Agent has two different endings in which you get to choose the outcome, but the canon ending is that to remain undercover, you must shoot your handler Lambert. I'm not sure why Ubisoft chose this ending to be canon, as this ending feels incredibly forced and out of character for Sam Fisher, and will always leave a sour taste in my mouth. Conviction is the most divisive game in the Splinter Cell franchise, and with good reason. During the time this game was developed, more studios were forcing originally good franchises into very linear and story-focused games, such as Hitman Absolution and Tomb Raider, in an attempt to make them more accessible to a new audience and breathe more life into what they thought was a dying series. Splinter Cell Conviction took away almost everything that gave Splinter Cell its identity. But to start, we'll look at the story. Again, Ubisoft decided to double down on the character of Sam Fisher, who is now a retired operative just trying to live a civvy life. When he is confronted with the news that Sarah's death was actually faked by Lambert for some really bizarre reason that makes no sense, we see Sam sent on a revenge mission to take out the people responsible. Now, if that explanation sounds incredibly bland and messy, it's because Conviction's story is. It feels a lot like the plot of a straight-to-DVD release film, which has a beginning, it has an end, but nothing really happens in between. This might have been acceptable if the gameplay was enough to carry us through the story, but it wasn't. Conviction decides to try and make this game as accessible and as dumb as possible, so that your average person buying Call of Duty would be interested in buying it. By throwing away the stealth mechanics almost entirely in favour of fast-paced gunpat with the all-too-hated mark and execute ability. The mark and execute ability took away the need for a player's skill, as you can mark up to 4 enemies and click one button to watch them all drop dead. There are some parts of the gameplay I enjoyed. For instance, Sam's more fluid movement did make getting around the level more enjoyable, and makes me feel like more of a hunter. And also the use of fading colours on the screen to black and white to signify you are hidden in the shadows were great ways of pushing the Splinter Cell franchise into the modern gaming era. Plus the gruesome interrogation scene, but mixed with the dumbed down difficulty, easy to kill enemies, and the cover to cover shooting seen in Gears of War just made this an overall disappointment and a true misstep for the series. If one game had to be highlighted as the reason Splinter Cell has disappeared, it would be Conviction, as it failed to attract new players, but worst of all, pushed away those who were loyal. The last entry into the Splinter Cell series, Blacklist. Blacklist did everything it could to be the jack of all trades, and though it might not be a master of them all, it certainly left a good enough impact for us to want to see more of what Ubisoft had to offer. In my opinion, the best way to explain Blacklist is if Chaos Theory and Conviction had a child, this would be it. Like Chaos Theory, it suffers from a rather bland story, with a predictable plot, but it is engaging and enjoying enough to drive the narrative for the gameplay. And the gameplay is literally Chaos Theory, but refreshed for the modern community. It keeps the fast-paced movement for Sam Fisher from Conviction, but blends it deeply with stealth and higher difficulty, so that you can't just tackle missions guns blazing. There are a variety of different enemy types, some that can only be attacked from above or below, meaning you have to get up close and personal to take them out. There are enemies who have equipment that block your iconic goggles so that you can't map out your attacks, and are forced to stay off the ground to remain alive. Everything in Blacklist has purpose and brings together what is the most complete Splinter Cell game since Chaos Theory. Blacklist even introduces a ranking system in which it rates your playstyle at the end of each mission, which brings more replayability and a chance to challenge yourself in different playstyles. Blacklist features a progression system in which you can customize Sam to your liking and unlock new guns and abilities. You might find I'm not saying all too much about Blacklist, but that's because I want you to go back and play this for yourselves, as I believe this is the best iteration of Splinter Cell. If you own an Xbox One, you can even get it on backwards compatibility from the store. Splinter Cell Blacklist is my favourite in the Splinter Cell series, as I feel it did everything Conviction tried to do, but did it well. It's always confused me why this game was received so poorly, and barely sold many copies. In my honest opinion, I think it comes down to the change of voice actor for Sam Fisher, which for all previous entries had been Michael Ironside. I think the general consensus at the time was that Michael Ironside had fallen out of love for the series, so as loyal fans, gamers decided to also essentially boycott Blacklist and hate on the news voice actor. But after the game's release, it was actually revealed that Michael Ironside was undergoing treatment for cancer, and that was the only reason he stepped away. I think had we had known differently at the time, the game might have been looked at through different lenses. It's been 6 years since we last had a Splinter Cell game, and despite a few cold trails, we're no better off knowing when we'll next see an entry. In 2018, in Ubisoft's Ghost Recon Wildlands, we had a DLC mission which gave us the chance to play side by side with Sam Fisher, with Michael Ironside in the lead role, as we perform an espionage mission. This DLC caused the fans to rally and speculate at Sam Fisher's return at this year's E3, but it went by without a word. In late 2018, the CEO of Ubisoft said that Splinter Cell franchise was still one they cared about dearly. It was just a case of allocating enough resources to the project. This disheartened fans, as that it meant if it's not even in production yet, it's still more than likely a few years off. And last of all, with the release of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there's a really out of place Easter egg where we see the classic goggles of Sam Fisher, with the main character asking if it were 4th echelon. In terms of knowing at all when the new Splinter Cell game is coming, that's pretty much it. A few Easter eggs and cold trails. So why is it taking so long to get another title out? Is it because of the decline in sales of Blacklist? Or is there more to it than that? The modern gaming world is forever changing, and publishers and developers alike try to build the game so they can ride whatever the next wave of hype is. We see this today with Battlefield and Call of Duty implementing Battle Royale modes. We've seen this a few years ago with the surge of zombie games. It all comes down to what the next big thing will be. A statement was made not so long ago that single player games are dead. It was quickly put to bed though, by the massive successful PlayStation exclusives such as Spider-Man, God of War, Detroit and Horizon. And I believe that Ubisoft as a company do still believe in the single player game. We've seen success from the titles such as Far Cry, Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed, and although they might still contain multiplayer elements, they're still a single player game first. But the issue with Ubisoft is that the games tend to have a very similar gameplay structure. They are all open world, they have some sort of viewpoint system, they've recently implemented more RPG mechanics, and they have a ridiculous amount of side objectives to make the game feel like more than it is. And funnily enough, they all make out to be stealthy tactical games, but they all play out like action games. And if you look at the Ubisoft IPs, they pretty much all follow this formula in some way or another. Now, if Ubisoft believes this formula is what sells copies and makes them money, how could a Splinter Cell game possibly work within those constraints? I think this is currently the dilemma Ubisoft is facing with the franchise. How could they possibly make Sam Fisher work in an open world environment, without it being a direct clone of Metal Gear The Phantom Pain? I believe we will see those goggles in the next 4 years. The question really is, are we looking at another game which has an issue with identity? Or a game that suffers from a weak story but brings such strong gameplay mechanics that the story doesn't really matter? It's been your boy TJFL. I'll catch you in the next one.